And we are back. We are on the fifth audio tape in Wednesday Wars by Gary Schmidt. And let's get to it. On page 62.
That night, I dreamed that Caliban sat at the foot of my bed, looking a lot like Danny Hupfer and telling me how I was going to end up all scurvy and blistered if I didn't get the cream puffs next week. The end of the 3 weeks I had promised. Beware. Beware, he said, and I decided I should.
Side note, do we think he's talking about Caliban the rat or Caliban in the Shakespeare play? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Talking about Caliban in the Shakespeare play, right? Or if it was a rat, that would be pretty terrifying.
So on Friday, I went to Goldman's Best Bakery and put $2.45 on the counter, all the money I had in the world. $2.45 can buy a great deal, said Mr. Goldman. So what is it you want to buy? 22 cream puffs, I said. Mr. Goldman added up 22 cream puffs in his head. For that, you need $2 more and 80 cents. I need the cream puffs by next week. You still need $2 more and 80 cents. I can work. I can wash dishes and stuff. I should need you to wash dishes. I have 2 good hands. They can wash dishes too, and I don't have to pay them. I could sweep and clean up. Mr. Goldman held up his 2 good hands. I sighed. You don't need anything done around here? What I should really need, he said, is a boy who knows Shakespeare. But is there a boy who knows Shakespeare these days? No, not one. You would think that they should teach Shakespeare in school, but do they? No. Okay, I'm not kidding here. Mr. Goldman really said that. What I should really need is a boy who knows Shakespeare. Those words came right out of his mouth. I know Shakespeare, I said. Sure you do, Mr. Goldman said. You still need $2 more and 80 cents. I do.
Do we think Mr. Goldman believed him when he said that he knew Shakespeare? Because he goes, you still need $2 and 80 cents, right? So, do we think that he's just kind of being like, yep, sure you do, but you still owe me, because then watch what happens.
Goldman put his hands on his hips. Show me some Shakespeare then. I went back to The Tempest, and not just the Caliban curses either, which is all that Mrs. Baker thought I knew. I spread my arms out wide. Now does my project gather to a head. My charms crack not, my spirits obey, and time goes upright with his carriage. How's the day? Mr. Goldman clapped his hands. Really? And then he leaped up on a stool behind the counter, and Mr. Goldman is not someone whose size encourages leaping. He clapped his hands again above his head, and a fine light flowering flew into the air, sort of like chalk dust, and a haze shimmered about his face. His voice changed, and when he spoke, it was as though he was chanting a high and faraway music. On the 6th hour, at which time, my lord, you said our work should cease. I spread my arms out even wider and tried to imagine long robes with sleeves that flowed down along the arms of Prospero. I did say so. When first I raised the tempest, say my spirit, how fares the king and's followers? The ands is not easy to say, but it came off pretty well, with about as much spit as beetles. Mr. Goldman clapped his hands again, and another shimmering of flour fell. Confined together, in the same fashion as you gave in charge, just as you left them. Mr. Goldman climbed down from the stool and held out his still flowery hand. His smile pushed his cheeks into round lumps. And that was how I got to be part of the Long Island Shakespeare Company's holiday extravaganza, which was opening next month. And how I got 22 cream puffs for $2.80 less than I should have, plus 2 more free since they come cheaper by the dozen. And it was a good thing. When Monday came and I walked into the classroom carrying a long box of cream puffs, it was pretty clear that Danny Hupfer and Marilee and Doug Swiatek and my tea would have been at me with daggers, looking for a pound of flesh if I had failed them.
Okay, so backtrack. How did he get the cream puffs? Because on page 65, he said, and that's how I got to be part of the Long Island Shakespeare Company Holiday Extravaganza, which is opening next month. He and Mr. Goldman was going back and forth with the Shakespeare, and Mr. Goldman, we're making, a guess here or an inference, saying that if you could do Shakespeare for me, then I'll give you these cream puffs, right?
I set the box on the shelf by the window and opened it up. 20.
What happened? Let's see.
That night, I owned lumps. And that was how I got to be part of the Long Island Shakespeare Company's Holiday Extravaganza, which was opening next month. And how I got 22 cream puffs for $2.80 less than I should have, plus 2 more free since they come cheaper by the dozen. And it was a good thing. When Monday came and I walked into the classroom carrying a long box of cream puffs, it was pretty clear that Danny Hupfer and Marilee and Doug Swiatek and my tea would have been at me with daggers, looking for a pound of flesh if I had failed them. I set the box on the shelf by the window and opened it up. 24 cream puffs. Brown, light, perfect cream puffs waiting to be eaten after lunch. Mrs. Baker didn't say anything, but all through English for You and Me, the buttery vanilla smell of the cream puffs wafted around the room with the circulating air, and even Mrs. Baker couldn't help but look at them. I saw her nostrils grow wide. Danny Hupfer kept turning around and grinning at me. Marilee pretended like she didn't care much, but she's a terrible liar.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, so, you can make a note here how, Hood brought in cream puffs for everybody, right? And obviously, Mrs. Baker was excited, but was she going to show it? Has she been showing a lot of emotion? Kind of, but not really, right? Okay, so now we're going to 6. We are on page 65.
If lunchtime hadn't come when it did, we might have all gone wild. Even Mrs. Baker. But finally, the school clock clicked to noon, and we crammed our sandwiches down our throats, and then Danny Hupfer stood up and approached the brown, light, perfect cream puffs, sort of reverently. Not just yet, Mr. Hupfer, said Mrs. Baker. Danny Hupfer looked at her like he just missed an easy goal. Marilee looked at me like it was my fault. If you were going to eat cream puffs, said Mrs. Baker, you were going to do it on your own time. Go out for lunch recess and come back a few minutes early. Then you may gorge yourselves as you please. I bet she's going to take 3 for herself, whispered Doug Swiatek. No, Mr. Swiatek, she is not going to take 3 for herself, said Mrs. Baker. She is going to St. Adalbert's quickly to light a candle, and she will be back in time for your gorging. Now out. All of you. We went out. It was...
Side note, why do you think she wanted them to go to recess first? Do you think she was trying to teach them self-control? No, right? What do you think she was doing? She had to go run an errand, right? She's going to St. Adalbert's to light a candle. So before everybody starts, freaking out over the cream puffs, she's like, let's go outside for recess so I could do this, and then you can come back in.
This is, of course, a cold November day on Long Island, and everything was, of course, gray. The sky, the air, the grass, the drizzle misting down. Gray everywhere. We stood around in huddled groups, a little bit damp, and still hungry because we'd eaten so fast, and there were 24 cream puffs waiting for everyone back in the classroom. 24 brown, light, perfect cream puffs. They better be good, said Marilee. They'll be good, I said. They better be really good, said Danny Hupfer. They'll be really good, I said. When there were only 7 minutes left in recess, Danny Hupfer declared that we had served our time, and even if Mrs. Baker hadn't come back yet, we deserved our cream puffs. So like an unstoppable mob, like a tidal wave, like an avalanche, we rushed into Camillo Junior High, up 2 flights of stairs, and to the doorway of our classroom. And stopped. On the shelf, the long box of cream puffs lay ripped apart, and in the middle of the buttery, brown, light, perfect cream puffs stood Sycorax and Caliban up on their hind legs, their paws holding shreds of crust to their mouths. Their faces were covered with yellow vanilla filling and powdered sugar. Their naked tails were thick with it. Their scabby skin was slathered with it. Then Mrs. Baker came behind us and peered in. The rats opened their snouts and clacked their yellow teeth at her. And Mrs. Baker screamed, "Strange stuff, the dropsy drown you, the red plague rid you, thrice double ass." That last one I knew about, but I wasn't going to tell you I knew it because of what you'd think of me. Sycorax and Caliban understood the meaning of all those, I guess. They scurried out of the box, skidding in the vanilla cream, and leaped into the radiators. We heard them climb up inside the walls, then scamper across the asbestos tiles. There was a long and absolute silence. Then Mara Lee turned to me. "You still owe us cream puffs," she said. 10 days, said my T. 10 days, I said. "We gave you 3 weeks already," said Danny Hupfer. "Now you have 10 days. 10 days, I said. "Here is another situation where repetition is not a rhetorical virtue. Clean up the mess, Mr. Hoodhood," said Mrs. Baker. And I did, but I wasn't happy.
Ew. I can't believe that. Poor Hoodhood. He tried to do something awesome, and then the rats came. Disgusting. Do you think Mrs. Baker was upset? Yes, right. She was upset. She was using slang or cuss words from Shakespeare, right? And the only person who understood them was who? Hoodhood, right? Oh, the poor thing. Now I have to clean it up. The sticky note I've made so far note is ew on top of page 67 because that's nasty seeing rats all in cream puffs, right?
Usually, the last week before Thanksgiving was pretty easy. Everyone is thinking about 2 days off from school.
Sorry. I'm going to have to fast forward it a little bit. Need to refresh it. So we are on 6, right? Yep. Let's see if I can find the spot. Sorry.
10 days, I said. Here is another situation where repetition is not a rhetorical virtue. Clean up the mess, Mr. Hoodhood, said Mrs. Baker. And I did, but I wasn't happy. Usually, the last week before Thanksgiving was pretty easy. Everyone is thinking about 2 days off from school, grandparents coming for dinner, the Syosset-Farmingdale football rivalry and all that. But it wasn't an easy week this year. Not for me. It was a long week. First, it somehow became my fault that Sycorax and Caliban ate the cream puffs. I think this was because of Mara Lee. For 3 days, things were whispered about me that I hope I never have to hear. Then second, on Wednesday afternoon, when I went to get the script for the Long Island Shakespeare Company's holiday extravaganza from Mr. Goldman, I found out that I was going to play Ariel from The Tempest. Ariel is a fairy. A fairy. Let me tell you, it is not a good thing for a boy from Camillo Junior High to play a fairy. Especially a boy who has been singing soprano for Miss Violet of the Very Spiky Heels. I don't think I can play Ariel, I told Mr. Goldman. Here's your costume, he said, and handed me a pair of bright yellow tights with white feathers on the... Well, I'll let you guess what part the white feathers were attached to. Third, now that I needed another set of cream puffs, I asked my father if he might ever imagine a 3-week advance on my allowance, since he had just clinched the deal with the Baker's Sporting Emporium, and he just laughed out loud. You ought to be a comedian, he said. You and Bob Hope, you could travel to Saigon together and do troupe shows. I wasn't trying to be funny, I said. You must have been trying to be funny, since no kid of mine, in his right mind, would ever ask for a 3-week advance on his allowance, he said. I was trying to be funny, I said. I thought so, he said. Fourth, when I told Meryl Lee that I might not be able to get the cream puffs by next Wednesday, I wouldn't spread that around if I were you, she said, and that my father was a cheapskate since he just landed this big deal with the Baker's Sporting Emporium and he wouldn't give me a dime. She started to cry. Really? Meryl Lee, I said, it's not all that bad. I'll find a way to get the cream puffs. I mean, you jerk, said Meryl Lee. You don't understand anything. And she wouldn't speak to me or anyone else the rest of the day. Fifth, on the Tuesday before the Wednesday of the cream puffs deadline, Mr. Guareschi came in and asked Mrs. Baker if she knew what pied ninny meant. She asked him why he needed to know that, and he told her that Doug Swiatek's brother was in his office at that very moment for having called Mr. Ludema a pied ninny. Mrs. Baker stared straight at me. And sixth, when Wednesday morning came around and I walked in with a bag of 5 cream puffs, which was as far as a 1-week allowance stretches, it was pretty clear that I was doomed. With 5 cream puffs, almost everyone could have 1/4 of a cream puff, I pointed out. It was better than nothing. Meryl Lee shook her head. You're dead, said Danny Hupfer. And I supposed I was. At least I wouldn't have to wear the yellow tights with the white feathers attached to you can guess where.
Okay, so sounds like Hood Hood is having a terrible week. And on top of page 69, I wrote, was he actually trying to be funny when he asked his dad for an advance in his allowance? No, he was being serious, right? Okay, so once again, I'm going to stop this video. I'm going to do the very last video, okay? We only have 2 more pages left.